A novel from tomorrow. Chapter 1: The Mechanicals. Sometimes the road to the dark city can be long and confusing, at times it can be unforgiven. Dear friend, I offer my hand along the way. Sometimes, when there's a moon in the sky and the birds fear to fly, a large city can be seen resting on a cloud. The residents know not of time, not anymore. From our point of view and understanding of the world, time travel, and how everything is. This city is us, from a time far from now. Where women are no longer women and men are no longer men, we are just a human concept. The age of change has begun in a dark city. From the future, its life and people has presented itself as a somber reminder, a dark beacon in the night of questions and answers, one of which, when we are no longer human, by today's definition. Will we still be human? The trouble with women is that all you get is sympathy. They will probably still be patting me on the head when the elevator destroys the world, what's left of it anyway. As I searched for red blood, I took a deep breath to ease the tightness gripping my chest, a strange reminder of what a heart attack feels like. This would be her last chance. She either helped me or else. Was she gone? A dark shape moved on the left, only a horse in the stables. Across the square, the open gate framed a deserted drawbridge. Why did it have to get dark so soon? At last, I saw someone to the right, standing on the castle wall. Shadows from the tower hid her features, but she stood straighter than the farm girls. It was Red Blood, a woman I would honestly call a woman, that is if they still wished to be called that. She frowned, I thought, when she saw me on the ladder, and when she extended her hand to help me onto the walkway, she tilted her head to make my name a question. Gypsy. It's cold, I said. It wasn't, not really, but she let me snuggle against her while she stared up at the mechanicals garage. Several times I started to speak, but what could I say when her thoughts were so clearly on tomorrow? So I watched the shadows chase the last rays of sunshine off the peaks and tried to marshal my arguments. I was too young, she would claim, but 15 years no, 30 winters, that sounded older than I was, but by our standards, I was almost grown. They would make me marry next year. Keep the bloodlines alive, they would say. The city was the one that cared and made the little humans anyway. It's a horrible, disturbing process that I don't wish to go into now. Finally, after the white rock of the cliff below the garage faded into darkness, she broke the silence. I'm worried about Apogee. You should worry about the elevator. I snapped back, I was always worried about the elevator. Have patience, little one. Her hand stroked my hair. Your time will come. I pulled away. Just look at it. You can see that it curves. She turned. The motion took her eyes to the east, but she didn't bother to look up. It's always been that way. Not in ancient times. It was straight then. My eyes sought the vertical line. The darkness of the land hid its base, but higher up the setting sun caught the silver thread as it rose into the sky. Once, 2 elevators carried women to their orbiting starships. But the old kingdom was gone, destroyed when the western elevator fell. The eastern elevator was the last of their ancient wonders, and now it too was in trouble. Up where the stars poked pinholes in the darkening sky, I could see it curve gently to the south. It was falling. They would blame me. They said no, but they blamed my ancestors when the western elevator fell, and in the end, they would blame me too. It's up to me to save it, I said. I need your help. Red Blood spread her hands. You know that I'm committed to Apogee. I told you. It's not about him. I'm sorry. But he always gets everything. I bit my lip. Law, I whispered as a drop of crimson blood dripped down the corner of my mouth. I might as well have stamped my feet, acting as a junior. I am sure Red Blood would have found some delight in my childish behavior, but I didn't. Good night, Gypsy, she said, making the words a sigh that signaled the end of her patience. She had no time for kids. Not now. I watched her walk away. She paused for the briefest moment, but her glance was to the garage, not to me. Then she faded into the shadows. I would have thrown myself off the wall except for my hand, acting on its own, crept into my pocket. So I let my fingers caress the cool, slick sides of the cards, as they always did, until my fingers felt the cards warm to life. Sometimes they would glow bright green or flash gold, then my fingers magical traced quickly over the smooth edges to find the one card separated from the others. I drew it out. The mech card, an omen of adventure. Sometimes the cards were like that, so right, yet you still had to think about what to do. The mech card. It had to be about tomorrow. I would have one last chance. To show that I was not a child. Smoky aromas from the breakfast fires still lingered in the air when the trumpeters blew their horns and the procession came out through the castle gates. Everyone, even the people from the fair, crowded into the narrow street to watch them pass. They got in the way and you couldn't see anything except the pennants dragging a bubble of applause and commotion through the village. I couldn't get to the front, but as the procession passed, I found a box to stand on. Even so, I still had to raise up on my toes to see over the women's heads. I could just make out Red Blood leading the way with Apogee on her arm. Red Blood's company flanked them. Stoneheart carried Apogee's pennant, Slayer, the mechanic's pennant. Mechanic Axe Blade, the court and important property owners trailed close behind. Red Blood looked fierce. She wore full battle gear, a broadsword across her back, a short sword at her side, and numerous knives stuck in her belt and strapped to her legs. The black leather armor and polished breast cups clung to her figure and emphasized her strength. Red Blood! Red Blood! Look at me, a little village boy called as she passed. Her answering wink brought a chorus of screams and whistles from the other boys. They kept it up, making her grin and breaking her pretense at a serious demeanor. Apogee remained somber. Dressed in the traditional heavy shirt and baggy trousers of a mech rider, he kept his eyes straight ahead and did not respond when called. Since ancient times, the flight ceremony has tested the boys from Fairhaven. By mountain law, only boys who have flown can rule. So today Apogee would ride a mechanical and earn the right to commission a company. One day he would become the rider, his captain, the mechanic. The confusion and milling about helped me. No one noticed as I pressed through the excited crowd and attached myself to the procession. I was taking a chance. The women tried to keep boys out of the garage, too dangerous they said. An axe blade had threatened dire punishment for the next time I got into trouble. But I had drawn the mech card. I had to go. The long path to the garage wound back and forth up the face of the mountain. On the switchbacks, I could look up and see the black openings of the cave mouths where the mechanicals took off and landed. They liked the long drop down the sheer cliff because of it. Allowed them to build up the speed needed to create lift from their wings. As a boy, you dream of getting your wings, but the women are the ones that normally find them and then the choice would be theirs. But the trip dragged on when you had to walk. I kept hoping we would finally be there, but it never seemed that the garage got any closer. Eventually, the pull of the steep trail wore at my legs and as my excitement cooled, my mind drifted. Below I could see the village, grown tiny as we climbed. I spread me arms. I was a mechanical soaring high above the land. I swooped down low and fast over the rooftops. The boys and old women ran around in panic, frightened by the fierce rush of my passing. Trying to chase me off, guards shot arrows into the air. But I laughed at such feeble efforts and used my speed to dodge the tiny shafts. Choosing a fat cow for my prey, I swept forward in a terrific dive, impaling it with my manipulators and dragging it into the air. With mighty beats of my wings, I surged upwards towards my garage. The grasp of a powerful hand on my arm ended my triumph. It belonged to Mistress Talleyrand, a shop owner I could sometimes talk out of taffy or peppermint. "Careful, gypsy. You almost went over the edge." Her words made me look down. When I saw the depths below my feet, my head spun and I clung to her. "You shouldn't be here anyway," she continued as she dragged me to safety. "Maybe you should go back down to the village." "Apogee wants me here," I said. "He says he might need me." It wasn't really a lie, I was Apogee's adopted brother, he should have invited me. She looked dubious but couldn't think of another excuse to send me back. "All right," she said at last, "but stay out of the way. And no more play acting." I wiggled from her grasp and hurried to catch up with the procession. I had to be more careful. What would Red Blood think if I got kicked out for acting like a kid? At the garage, I followed the procession through a series of dimly lit tunnels until we stepped into the glare of light flooding a large cavern. Across the cavern, blue sky marked where it broke out of the cliff edge. To the left, more tunnels led back into the rock, to the right, a little alcove overlooked the ledge. While the crowd milled around in the center of the cavern floor, I stayed in the tunnel hoping to keep out of sight. Then, thinking that the alcove would be a better spot, I edged quietly around the cavern wall towards it. But when I got there, I saw that someone else had the same idea. A little girl hugged the shadows where she could watch without being seen. When she saw me, her eyes widened and she let her mouth fall open. The protruding teeth betrayed her, she was human. I started to summon a woman to chase her off, but then I remembered my own questionable status. So I had to risk her bad luck by throwing pebbles at her until she retreated down a dark tunnel. However, she was too dumb to realize that no one wanted to share her misfortunes. A few minutes later, I saw her across the cavern, peeking out from a small tunnel set well above the main floor. Soon my nose wrinkled as oily fumes wafted into the cavern. "It's the human girl," I thought, casting her baneful spell over us. But then a sudden silence drew my attention back to the cavern where a pale white mechanical crept onto the floor. They say the mechanicals are gentle and intelligent. Even though they couldn't speak, they once piloted ships between the stars. Still, the crowd backed away. The mechanical was the ghost of every insect you ever stepped on, come back to get you. First, it was big. The rectangular slab of its body was about the size and shape of a freight wagon. And it was unreal, grey shadows moving under the white, translucent surface, hinted at mysterious forces. And like an insect, the legs seemed too thin and too long. 4 straight shafts emerged from each side and angled upwards to tower over the body. At the top, the shafts formed a sharp V before extending to footpads on the ground. The insect-like appearance was heightened by manipulator arms extending from the front and by the 2 sensors setting on stalks rising from the top. Axe Blade stood near the ledge with her arms raised. "Come, White Mech, come," she commanded. A complex shuffle of legs glided the ghostly insect smoothly enough across the cavern. However, as it neared my alcove, its mechanical nature was revealed. A trail of acid droppings sizzled on the ground behind it, and seeping oil created yellow stains around the leg joints. Axe Blade made White Mech lower its torso to the cave floor, and when assistants brought steps forward, Red Blood helped Apogee onto the mechanical's back. She laid him down on a cushion and strapped him securely in place. Afterward, someone pulled away from the steps and the mechanical rose. Everything happened too fast. Expecting a speech from Axe Blade, I sat on the ground to wait it out. But Axe Blade simply raised her hand and White Mech stepped forward and disappeared over the edge. I didn't even get to see how the mechanical converted its legs into wings. By the time I inched over to the edge and looked down, white fabric was already billowing between them. They now formed the ribs of rectangular wings that extended from either side of the body. I Did see the leg ribs moving to tension the fabric and to adjust the shape of the wings until they caught the air. The mechanical soared out from the cliff face, and as it leveled off, it began beating the wings against the air to gain altitude. It rose quickly, and soon it was above us. When it reached a nearby peak, it wheeled about in a tight circle and immediately headed back, coming straight at us in a shallow dive. The landing was something. At the last moment, the mechanical spread its wings wide and braked sharply. With a loud crack, the fabric parted from the rear set of legs, and as they sprang down to the ground, the mechanical bounced and fell forward. 2 more cracks, following in rapid succession, freed the other legs to catch the body before it hit the ground. The wing fabric, it happened too fast to be sure, seemed to get sucked into the legs. As the women swarmed to the mechanical, I realized the show was all over. The flight, the whole ceremony, had lasted less than 5 minutes. I didn't spit when Red Blood took Apogee off, but I wanted to. What was he thinking? The women might never let him have another ride, and he hadn't done anything. He looked pale and seemed unsteady on his feet, but Red Blood seemed not to notice. Instead of shaking his hand properly, she covered it with hers and bowed so low she was practically kissing it. "Rider," she called him. I stayed in the alcove as the procession departed. The mech card had promised me adventure, but all I had gotten was to watch Red Blood slobber over Apogee. That little human rodent was going to get it good for ruining my luck. Crouching down into the darkest shadows, I settled down to wait. Slowly the noise from the procession faded, and the cavern became quiet except for slight echoes and whispers coming from the bowels of the garage. I began to fidget with growing impatience. I couldn't wait all day for her. I resolved to leave, then changed my mind when my ears picked up a new sound. Never loud, a scraping and brushing got closer and closer until, finally, I saw her emerging from the tunnel where White Mech had come and gone. She was spreading sawdust on the oil and acid drops and sweeping them into a bucket. As she moved onto the launch pad, I stepped silently from the alcove. Blocking her retreat to the tunnels, intent on her work, she did not immediately notice my presence, giving me time to take a good look at her. They say that the women who created the kingdom settled on Snowshoe because it was an isolated planet that no one else wanted, but this wasn't true. It was once home to others like us until they hurt the land and themselves. The isolation gave them the time and privacy they needed to remake themselves into bios, perfect women that were bigger and stronger and healthier than humans. And it does make sense that women who could tame a planet and build the elevators could remake themselves. But like their failed elevators, the remake must have been flawed. Human births were becoming less rare. I could see why no one wanted to be human. She was dirty, of course. Old oil stained her clothes, grease smudged her cheek, and black grime hid under her fingernails, about what you would expect from a mechanic. But the dirty yellow hair and crooked teeth made her look strange. And she was small, about my size and flat-chested. Just a kid. When she turned back to the caverns, the unexpected sight of my feet startled her. She gasped and stood open-mouthed while her eyes ran up and down my body. I gave her my meanest sneer. "So you like to spy on boys, do you?" "I meant no harm." Her voice squeaked. "I should thrash you well." She cringed a little, then nodded hopefully towards the big tunnel. "I can show you the mechanicals." I snorted. The bribe was so flagrant. Who did she think I was anyway? Still. See the mechanicals? Was that what the card meant? Maybe I could ride one. Red Blood would have to take me seriously then. She would have to help me save the elevator. "I know all the mechanicals," she persisted. "Flasher is nice, you could meet Flash Mech." I put my fists on my hips and tapped my foot impatiently. "Well, all right. But I should report you." "I know all about the mechanicals," she said as she led me down White Mech's tunnel. "They call me Tiny. I can show you everything. I never talked to a boy before." "The mechanicals call you Tiny?" No, the women, mechanicals don't talk. We stepped out of the tunnel onto a ledge overlooking the garage. I squinted into the bright sunshine and saw an elaborate system of tunnels, ramps, and ledges covering the steep walls of an open crater. On the crater floor, tanks and vats surrounded the waters of a shallow lake. A confusing network of pipes interconnected the tanks, and from one vat, a torch flamed from a long tube rising into the air. Rainbow colors glinted off islands of oil film floating on the lake. Several mechanicals lay on the lake shore with their wings spread out into the sun. A few others crept about their duties among the tanks. One mechanical swam in the water. Its legs spread straight out and rose and fell like oars as it propelled itself forward. Tiny tugged at my sleeve and I let her guide me down the ramp towards the lake. At the bottom, she released me and disappeared into an opening in the crater wall. I peered after her, and when my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I saw racks of legs, sensor balls, and other parts for the mechanicals. I got batteries, she said when she came out. She had untucked her blouse and pulled the tails into a sack to carry something heavy. We walked out onto the crater floor past several mechanicals sunning themselves beside the water. They remained motionless as we passed. But I saw their sensor balls turning as they tracked us. "This is Flasher," Tiny said as we approached a brown mechanical. Clearly, the name came from the glow of light that slowly rippled under the brown surface of the mechanical. But despite the snappy name, the stir of internal lights, the gentle sway of wings in the breeze, and the slow rotation of sensors gave Flasher a lazy appearance. Tiny handed me a fist-sized ball. "Throw her a battery." I examined the dull red ball in my hand. The clay-like material deformed when I squeezed it and came apart when I dug my fingers into it. I smoothed the battery back to its ball shape and looked at Flasher. Up close she looked too big to play with. A dozen feet seemed close enough, so I leaned over and threw the battery underhanded to her. She was lazy. Flasher's sensors barely moved as she casually opened a manipulator to capture the battery. She stuffed the ball into a hole in her body, then resumed her posture of quiet watching. I picked another battery out of Tiny's shirt and pitched it well above Flasher's head. In a blur of sudden motion, wing fabric unsnapped, legs pushed the body upright, and a manipulator extended to snag the battery out of the air. After the battery disappeared into the hole, Flasher stayed up, looking alert and ready. So I threw the next battery, as hard as I could, high and well away from her, out over the water. The throw was not fair, but Flasher sprang gamely backward into the air, pushing with her powerful legs and spreading her wing fabric for balance. She did catch the battery, at the peak of her leap, but had no chance to right herself. She fell on her backside, and although Tiny and I ducked, we were soaked from the splash. As I took the last battery from Tiny, Flasher righted herself in the shallow water, getting her legs set underneath her, ready to spring in any direction. But instead of throwing the battery, I stepped to the edge of the lake, holding it out to her. Her sensors rotated suspiciously as she puzzled out the new rules of the game. When I remained still, Flasher crept forward, looming over me. I made myself hold my pose, resisting the urge to back away from her. Slowly her manipulator jaws closed over my hand and stripped the battery from my grasp. I moved between the two manipulators and touched Flasher's body. It was smooth and warm and gave just a little when I pushed hard. She was patient with me as I poked and prodded at one of her manipulators. For grasping, it had two powerful jaws that could rotate to any angle. And for finer tasks, the jaws could fold back to let tendrils get at the work. Her sensor stalks, I noticed, had bent forward so she could track my explorations. "Come on, let's take a ride around the lake," Tiny invited. She stepped on the joint where the first leg joined the body and scampered up onto Flasher's back. Then she held down her hand and helped me climb behind her. She slid up between the sensor stalks and had me sit behind her with my arms around her waist. "Swim, Flasher, swim," she commanded. Flasher turned in the water and stroked gently away from the shore. "She understands you," I asked. Sure she does, I know all the commands, I'll show you. Say, left. Flasher, left, only loud so she can hear. It was fun learning to ride the mechanical. I liked the feel of the powerful legs pushing us across the lake, the feel of the noon sun drying the splash of cold water, and even the feel of my arms around the little human girl. When we returned to our starting point, I jumped off. Come on, I said. Let's take her to the ledge. I want to fly her. Fly? It's too dangerous. I thought you wanted to be friends. You can meet all the mechanicals, we can have a swim in the lake. I raised my arms. Come, Flasher, come. Water cascaded down her sides as she heaved herself onto the bank and followed me towards the crater wall. Wait, Tiny cried. Wait, we've got to put on her harness. I lowered my arms to stop the mechanical. All right, I said. But make up your mind. If you want to be friends, you've got to help me. When I want. I helped Tiny carry a cushion out from the storage cave. The leather straps coiled on its top made it heavy and awkward to handle, but with Tiny pulling and me pushing, we lifted it onto Flasher's back. Afterward, Tiny made Flasher rise high on her legs so she could drop loose straps to me while I ran them under the mechanical's body and threw them back up. Once the harness was secure, Tiny pulled me up and we rode Flasher up the ramp. At the ledge, a tight knot formed in my stomach when Tiny made me lie down on the cushion. It positioned me up front between the sensor stalks, forcing me to look down past Flasher's body into the depths below the cliff edge. Fortunately, Tiny was quick. She used straps on the harness to tie my thighs in place and showed me a strap to grasp with my hands. Hang on tight, she said. And just let her go out and come right back. When Tiny scrambled off and raised her hand, Flasher stepped off the ledge and we plunged downwards.